But I mean, there is something special about like connecting with someone, talking about what they're trying to do, and getting to the core of it. Because what I find is that sometimes what they're trying to do or what they're trying to say, they get so lost in their own headspace dealing with it that like there's entire parts of it that they frankly just either forget about or like they don't think about what the real implications are of it. Like I one of my clients that I've worked with in the past runs it's a nonprofit company that he runs, and they we actually trying to analyze like what is your business model, who are your customers, like what are you trying to do with this, and I'd have him tell me what it is, and I go I think you're wrong, like that's not your customer, like those people do get something out of what you do, but it's not who your main customer is, and what you think your product is isn't what your product really is, and we'd have these meetings periodically. He's like, no, I think you're wrong. I think you're wrong. 2 weeks later, I guess like, you're absolutely right. This is like I've been thinking about our business completely wrong. Like the customer is somebody different. It's this is the real value that we have, and by the way, this is like a year into this organization.
It's a full pivot right there.
By the way, and this is a guy who does fantastic work helping other nonprofits, grow and scale. So this isn't a guy who doesn't understand what he's doing. It's just when you're so close to your baby, like your brain is actually wired to kind of fix stuff for you. I can't tell you how many times. Like I don't care how many times you as an author go over your book to proofread. There's so much crap you're gonna miss just because your brain gets used to seeing it and just completely fixes it before you ever actually interpret what you're reading.
Yep. Happens all the time. And with authors, one of the big things that I've noticed most of them do is they get lost in the world. They spend so much time dreaming up this place that it's almost like you can't see the forest for the trees anymore. You see it so vividly in your head, but it doesn't quite transfer in the page. And I have to say, I don't know what this is. You need to describe it to me because you're implying that it's a thing, but I don't have any way to imagine it.
Yeah, you've never set that up for me before. I'm curious if you think that in any way, like, and I'll bet you complain that like my biggest critique of modern television in particular is that modern television gets too lost in the world. They develop these overarching storylines that eventually take over the shows. Like my favorite two examples are the X-Files, where it's perfect monster of the week show, and then longer into the run than most shows, but they get so obsessed with what the overarching theme is and like the big bad guy in the shadows that you stop getting the fun monster of the week elements that are why you tuned in the first place. Fringe is another example of that, where by season 3 of Fringe, like
one of my favorite shows.
The first 2 seasons are one of my favorite shows, but by season 3, it's like they're so obsessed with this alternate universe. It's like, yeah, but what happened to like the cool monsters and like the cool ideas that we got in the first 2 seasons, where like we could watch a self-contained episode and just appreciate it for what it was. Now I'm like, if I miss an episode, I no longer know what's going on, who any of the characters are. Why are there suddenly 2 of everybody? But this one's good and that one's not good. And
there's a gaming term called power creep, and it applies a lot to fiction writing, both in comics and in just general fiction writing, which is the longer a story progresses, the harder it is to make stakes, because your characters evolve over the course of it. And as it builds up and builds up, you start with a character who's limited and end with a character who's so expansive that you have to figure out something that actually threatens up here. It happens with comic books more obviously. You get to a point where every other story arc is some galactic threat that's going to destroy the universe. And after 5 of those, you're like, okay, here's another one.
And what's funny to me is that, like, that the idea of that's not even how I would attack that problem. I think finding a bigger bad isn't always like the idea that works. I'm thinking of Telepathic Bunny right now and his story and what we've talked about with his character. And kind of the way you like his character was a badass once upon a time, but like now you have a guy who's just been beaten down. Like, he's gone through some shit that now he's not the powerful guy he once was. So as opposed to raising the stakes, like you're crippling your character in a way to see if they can get around in this new world where they're not the big badass. And to me, that seems like a much more interesting story.
It is. It's a very interesting story. It can be a bit difficult for some to wrap their head around because there are people who do enjoy the power fantasy, the big bad, rock 'em, sock 'em, knock buildings down type of engagement. But for those of us who like depth of character, an arc where your character is crippled or at the very least reduced in their power creates inner struggle, which is something that a lot of people miss. Inner struggle makes you want to be close to a character. When they have something that they're fighting with, you get the same feeling that you get when your friend calls you and wants to talk, but they're not really explaining anything. They just want to be on the phone with you. And you're like, you get that feeling something's wrong and I want to be there to help. That connection is phenomenal.
Well, there's only so big of an enemy you can give Batman before you have to call in Superman. Like, and what's funny is like even in that, look at Batman's arc. They're constantly screwing with Batman, tying his hands behind him to try and justify. And by the way, Batman's one of the longest running comic books of all time. So like, clearly you can make it work. And I think probably some of the most meaningful stories in comics are Batman stories. Like they're the ones that stick out because they feel the most human. Like, and you're right. When you talk power fantasy, it's like it's great to have the power fantasy, but it's almost like you're missing. Like you can get depth of power in characters. It's like you don't have this thing that you always relied on. Maybe you're powerful in other ways that we've never explored because you always have this other thing to rely on.
Mm-hmm. And the juxtaposition between physical power and what's happening internally with the soul or the mind, which is something that Batman writers historically have done very well. For a human, he's better than most humans, but he's still just a human. You're putting him up against Killer Croc, a metahuman. He has to behave differently, and it takes a while for him to suss out tactically how to take this character down. But then you have arcs like the Hush arc, where it was attacking his mind and distracting his body. So the reader got this opportunity to watch him kick butt and got that power fantasy hit, but they also got a look inside the brain and the psyche and the soul of the character that really endeared people to that particular arc.